What up, y'all? Mrs. U Nation, aka Savage on the Ginger Raffer. Today I'm going to be your judge. And today we are going to look at Bermuda Triangle. Because today's defendants is two particular things: Bermuda Triangle and the people who play Bermuda Triangle. So the Bermuda Triangle players. The reason for this video is basically a response to W Slasher's video Why I Hate Bermuda Triangle, as well as some of the responses from the Bermuda Triangle fan base and everything else. So, um, the video is pretty short, so if you're really gonna go watch that video first and then come back to this one, go ahead. I'll put the video link in the description. But here's the thing: Bermuda Triangle players and Bermuda Triangle as a whole has been getting a lot of flack from a lot of players. And honestly, the reputation of the clan in general is pretty shit. Like, a lot of people hate this clan in general. But we're here to discuss, is it even worth it? Do they actually deserve the hate that they get? Let's try to find out in this one. So, the first evidence I would like to point out in this particular thing is, does Bermuda Triangle as a whole get hate? Does it deserve it? I kind of want to say yes, for a couple of reasons. It's not necessarily the clan's fault. It's basically Bushiroad's fault. And Bushiroad is, you already know, they're the ones who do like all the design and everything else. And to be honest, the community doesn't really have that much leeway of how certain stuff get designed. You know, they just design something, we're hoping that it doesn't get completely busted or anything else like that. But at the same time, I would also like to point out that Bushiroad is definitely known for playing favoritisms. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of game companies that does play favoritisms with some stuff. Like, do not get me wrong, that is a thing. But I feel like Bushiroad's favoritism is to a point where some of the clans and some of the other content of the game doesn't really get the right reputation that it deserves, and it's usually always behind a lot of other, clans in the game because of how low represented said clan is. I know Bushiroad was trying to change that with some of them, and they basically did. Like, look at how OTT and Murakumo was during the whole G era. They were considered like one of the 5 worst clans in the game throughout that whole era. Like, OTT did get that single push with Battle Sisters, like during, what was it? I think it was the Demonic King thingy. I don't remember what that set was called, but I do remember they got that huge push for a while because, the Battle Sister thing was pretty good, and then you also had Ika Mishima, that was also a thing. So they got that pretty big push. But then after that, they kind of slowly died down, and then they completely died down because all of that thing that was threatful was no longer a threat due to power creep. But then Murakumo, they got a lot of interesting stuff, but it wasn't good enough to actually compete with whatever the meta was at that particular time. Hell, it showed up in Technical Booster 2, where, in my personal opinion, the Technical Boosters were legitimately the worst sets that Bushiroad's ever came up with. I actually want to make a video on that sometime though, so look out for that. Anyway, but then look at them now in the V series. Like OTT for the first half of the V series was like the best deck in the game. Like I remember like Imperial Daughter for the longest time was consistently dominating the meta. Like this lasted all the way up into surprisingly when Bermuda came out. But then you also have Murakumo, where nearly every single time they get support, they're always somewhere in the tier 1 bracket. I will honestly have to say that Yatsui was pretty much their weakest release debut. Now, Yasui's kind of sort of like, I'm not going to say he's tier 1. I want to say he's more like tier 1.5 because you already know Shiryuki is pretty strong. Um, it's very strong, it's big strong, but I don't think it's like quote unquote tier 1. Like I kind of feel like once this new set comes out like on Friday, like that kind of all goes down the drain, but that's just me. Anyway, um basically what I'm trying to say is they didn't really get that much reputation in the G era, but like in the V series, Bushiroad gave them like all the love. And that basically is a whole premise of if you give a clan good enough support, people will buy it. I've been saying this same line for years. But then Bermuda Triangle, they always find some type of way of screwing up the game somehow, screwing up the formats and everything else like that. Is it the Bermuda Triangle player's fault? Not necessarily, because again, it's how Bushiroad designs them. It's like think about this: the G era, we had so many good decks within the final days of the G era. Like think about this: Bermuda's was the last set, and before that, it was Divine Dragon's Night. Now think about the format that we had in Divine Dragon's Night. We had Gear Chronicles that can do extra turns. Extra turns. That was the main reason why Gear Chronicles is winning. But then you also had like Altmile that finally became valuable to the meta because it forced you to play 2 cards each attack, which was actually pretty powerful in my honest opinion. And then you had Genesis that was kind of sort of doing a thing, but I want to count that more towards Gize because Gize was busted as hell. And you had like what? You had 3 different versions. You had the Genesis version, the OTT version, and you had the Angel Feathers version. So you had those 3 particular ones, and I think there was kind of sort of a Shadow Paladin version here and there, basically because of the new version Luard, but you hardly and rarely ever seen it. But then you also had Luard that was also coming back into the meta after being like downplayed for like a bit. He finally came back and was destroying stuff. You had some of the other cards from previous sets that was doing something. You had Kagero and Lane Joker. They were able to give you extra damage. They were able to give you free damage as long as you weren't at 5 damage. You were taking some damage regardless, even if even if you didn't want to. And then you had Nova Grapplers that was doing near infinite attacks. Near infinite attacks. It was that good. Zubat Victor, amazing. But then you have Bermuda Triangle that completely negated everything that everybody was doing in that particular format. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention. You also had Shiranui with the Rene thing because it was forcing you to play cards from hand and attacking you with dominated units. That was also a thing too. But yeah, like I said, Bermuda comes out of nowhere, completely annihilates everything. Makes everything almost completely useless. How the hell do you make a clan that can make extra turns as its win condition nearly useless? That's dumb. It's all like, and this is how good that Bermuda Triangle support was. Remember when they finally did the format split between standard and premium format, and every single premium format deck couldn't keep up with any deck that had their updated triggers? Bermuda Triangle was the only clan that was bodying clans in premium format with G era triggers, with 5k triggers. How does that work? How, Sway? Where every single clan in um where every single clan in premium format was completely useless without the new triggers. I don't understand how that happens. But then you also got to remember, prior to Bermuda Triangle also coming towards, standard format, you also got to remember that there was a lot of diversity that was going on there too. You had OTT, you had Narukami, you had Murakumo, you kind of sort of had Great Nature, you had Angel Feathers and Neo Nectars hanging on by a thread, but it was still somewhat playable. You had Gold Paladins, you kind of sort of had Shadows, you had you had Link Jokers that was kind of sort of doing a thing too. I mean, you had like a lot of different things. I feel like the only few clans that was actually taking somewhat of an L was all three Destructive War clans. So that's Tachi's, Mega Colony, and Spike Brothers, because they were very undersupported at the time. And then you had Gear Chronicles, because the Gear Chronicles support really wasn't that great. And then, of course, you had Nubatama, because the Nubatama support was very confusing, and at that particular time, they were only on that Wave 1 support, so nobody really had like a decent deck to play with, or a decent build of Nubatama in order for it to become like relevant. And then it was like maybe, oh yeah, it was Darky Regulars and Pale Moon, because they were also under supported around that time too. So you had all of those clans that were under supported, but you had a decent amount of diversity when it came to all of the other clans that can actually work. But then here comes Bermuda Triangle with a trial deck. And think about this. How does it feel to pay almost $200+ for $200+ for a regular deck, only for it to get completely bodied by a $20 trial deck? Like the Bermuda Triangle support in its first wave support was so good that the literal trial deck was bodying regular decks. And then when the actual set came out, it became a 3-deck format. It was basically Bermuda's, Kagero, and Link Joker. And the only reason why Kagero and Link Joker was somewhat there was because they were the actual counter to Bermuda Triangle. Was it a good counter? It wasn't the most foolproof counter, but it was good enough for them to have a little bit of a diversity when it came to what the meta was. It just became to a point where it was just a 3-deck format. How do you go from almost 12 viable decks to 3 with one set in general? And I also feel like that this whole Bermuda thing in general was also the thing that started Bushiroad relapsing into the power creep meta. Basically the whole thing of 2019 and 2020 Vanguard in general has been nothing but consistent power creep. And remember, prior to Bermuda Triangles coming into the game, the power creep really wasn't that bad. You know, it was like, again, it was pretty decent for its time. It wasn't the best, but it was manageable. people were happy with it. So again, you didn't have like later on, like let's say like earlier this year, we had the whole Riviera incident where Riviera in Japan was literally like, oh yeah, top eight is nothing but Riviera. Like everybody I remember was like panicking so hard about how good Riviera was. Like they're all like, oh yeah, once Riviera comes out, the whole game is dead. That's how good Riviera was. But of course, Bushy Road eventually changed it. But I also kind of feel like that it was just the beginning of how bad 2020 Vanguard has became in general. And now seeing that this upcoming Bermuda Triangle support is not getting as much flack as like Riviera did, but it's still getting a lot of flack. But to be honest, when W Slasher came out with that whole video as to why he promoted the triangle, it does hit a lot of good points. It does hit a lot of points as to one of the reasons why a lot of people in general hate Bermuda Triangle. Now, on to evidence two. Is it the Bermuda Triangle players' fault, and should they also get the flack of the hate that Bermuda Triangle get? Not really, because here's the thing. I know like a lot of Bermuda Triangle players are more. I feel like when you look at the the players who like collect things, it's usually towards the Bermuda Triangle players because you already know, like, they get the special SPs and everything else like that. And I mean, to be fair, it does look more like a collection clan than it actually does. At first it kind of looked more like a collection clan in general, but you could technically say that like anybody who tries to SB out Bermudas is basically doing it for collection purposes. They're not really doing it because, they have to, even if it is their main clan. But at the same time, like I knew a few people who actually like every time Bermuda Triangle will get support, they will always go in like 2 or 3 cases. They will buy 2 or 3 cases stuff just to max rarity out, Bermuda Triangle. And then when they definitely need any money, they basically just sold it all together in general. But outside of that, it's understandable that like a lot of people definitely hate it and definitely hate Bermuda Triangle players because of it. Because you already know, like anything that's meta, like people would just instantly hate that particular player for playing said meta deck. Like look at like the G era Gear Chronicles. Look at G era Gear Chronicles. Look at Break Ride era Link Jokers. Like I remember, like I came into the game like around the time like Break Ride era was like a thing. Like around the time Break Ride era, that's when I came in, and I do remember hearing stuff about a lot of people trying to quit the game because of how good Chaos Breaker Dragon was, and that's completely understandable after going, against like a decent Chaos Breaker player and all this other stuff. And I can kind of understand the hate that, Chaos Breaker Dragon got. And it's honestly the same thing with Gear Chronicle. Bushiroad put all of this support in the G era within Gear Chronicle, and Gear Chronicle became so powerful that it was near impossible to not see a list in the top 8 without at least one Gear Chronicle player. Even when they were at their weakest, you still saw Gear Chronicle players right then and there because they will always get the most support. They will always, it's like matter of fact, in my personal opinion, Gear Chronicle getting so much support is why, in my honest opinion, there were some clans that went out with support for a whole year because of Gear Chronicle. I remember some of those clans. Like I remember OTT went a whole year without support. Mega Colony, my clan, went a whole year and a half without support because they wanted to consistently give Mega Colony support. I even remember when Nova Grapplers went a whole year without support. I remember that too. So honestly, a lot of this stuff is basically because of, Bushiroad's like RNG department. I even remember when I actually, now that I think about it, I remember Grand Blue took a whole year to get in the G era. Like, I remember that. They were the last ones to get support in Legion, and they didn't get support until like another whole year and a half. I mean, luckily they were blessed with a trial deck. Like, obviously, they not only got support, but they also got a trial deck in the process. But still, the fact that they went through like a whole year without any type of support whatsoever outside of like Fighters Collection 2015 definitely says something. But like I said before, like Bermuda Triangle is, also part of the reason why like a lot of stuff like that is happening. It's all like people just don't like whatever the meta is, and anything that causes the meta to turn into a 3 deck format or turn into something very unhealthy, people are obviously going to hate on it. In Bermuda Triangle's case, it's most of the time. It's definitely most of the time. So honestly, I don't think that necessarily like Bermuda Triangle players don't need the hate, because I'm gonna tell you this. I'm gonna tell you this. There are times where a clan won't be meta. They will get something, they will instantly become meta, and yes, it will sometimes become the most threatful. For a prime example, another clan that I play is Tachikaze. Tachikaze got a lot of hate around the time Anger Blader came out, because Blader was just that good. It was Anger Blader and Sweeper that was definitely dominating. It wasn't completely dominating the format because obviously you had Hyuga, um obviously you had Silver Thorns and all this other, and even Narakami, I would even put that up there. You had those other decks that was also doing that, but it was the contributing factor to XL meta. And basically any good XL clan, a lot of people hated, including Tachikaze. And so it's a little bit understandable as to why Tachikaze players all of a sudden started getting hate, because they finally got something good. When it got up to a point where everybody was all like, oh, we need to get rid of Sweeper, or we need to get rid of Anger Blader. And even when they were coming out with that ban list earlier this February, everybody was expecting Sweeper to get hit, but then Anger Blader got hit, and everybody who wasn't a Tachikaze player was completely happy with it. Even though Tachikaze only gets support once a year, where it's usually at the end of the year, even though that one particular hit completely crippled the clan to a point where it was almost unplayable. Even though we still had Gigarex, it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. But then you start coming out with a bunch of other stuff that has the exact same property of Anger Blader and don't do anything about it. Like, you have Revron. Revron had the same properties. You had the Cross. The Cross had the same properties. You had Messiah. Messiah had the same properties. You had Luard. Luard definitely had the same properties as Anger Blader did. But then at the same time, oh yeah, but Anger Blader was like the huge threat, and you didn't want to do nothing about it. Luckily, Anger Blader's finally out the list. I mean, off the restriction list. So like, bygones can be bygones. But think about it. They had like a whole year where they were completely like useless and dependent on that one Anger Blader. They had to depend heavily on RNG. That was ridiculous. It's like I can understand if it was a clan like Royal Paladins because they always get support and whatnot though, but it's whatever. But anyway, overall, does Bermuda Triangle players really deserve the hate that they get? Nah. I don't think Bermuda Triangle players deserve all the hate that they get, even if they do play one of the most unbalanced clans in the game. Because it's mostly not their fault. I also want to like address an elephant in the room too. One of the major like negativities as far as like Bermuda is the whole lolicon thing. Okay, Bermuda Triangle's a little bit at fault for having lolicons in their particular grade 3 lineup, especially in the swimsuits. Okay, I can completely understand that. But not everything in Bermuda Triangle is a lolicon. Like, look at Coral for a prime example. Coral's not a lolly. But because like Bermuda Triangle has some lollies in their thing, obviously they're kind of sort of connected to being a lolicon. But at the same time, the logic doesn't make sense because practically when you really think about it, every single clan almost has some type of lolicon thing. So like to be honest, by that particular logic, let's say, okay, I'll give a prime example. I play Angel Feathers. You know, because no seal exists, does that make me a lolicon? No, not necessarily. I mean, and it's kind of sort of the same thing with like Neonectars. Neonectars have Ozu. You know, would that consider me a lolicon? No, it doesn't necessarily do it at all. I mean, it's kind of like a BS thing, and I understand that that's supposed to be like the quote unquote Bermuda Triangle stereotype, but at the same time, it's not necessarily like a true stereotype when you really think about it. Now, I'm not going to say that everybody who. Now, I'm not going to say that there are lolicons in Bermuda. I honestly do feel like there may be a few selected people who are lolicons and just playing Bermuda Triangle because of it, but not every single Bermuda Triangle player is a lolicon. I mean, that's kind of like saying that like every single player who plays Great Nature is a furry. Well, except for me, but that's besides the point. The point is, I'm trying to say is there's obviously there's some clans that have some type of stereotypes, but at the same time, the lolicon stereotype is kind of unfair to anybody trying to play Bermuda Triangle, especially when there's clearly some mature women in Bermuda Triangle. So there's that. But anyway, I guess to wrap this all up, the final verdict, in my honest opinion, when it comes to Bermuda Triangle is I feel like it's guilty. It's very sus. It definitely needs to get all the blame and hate because of the way Bushiroad designed it. You know, obviously anybody outside of Bermuda Triangles does not really, outside of Bermuda Triangle mains doesn't really like Bermuda Triangle as a whole in general. And basically, W Slasher video of like the hatred towards it does bring up a lot of valid points. But at the same time, I do also feel like that Bermuda Triangle players do not deserve to get as much hate as the Bermuda Triangle as a clan. So honestly, Bermuda Triangle is guilty of being like a social pariah, I guess. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But Bermuda Triangle players, they don't deserve to get lumped into that. It's not their fault that the clan has some type of attraction to them. Just like it's not like Mega Colony's fault that I became a Mega Colony main. I chose Mega Colony for a particular reason, and I'll stick to it. Just like Bermuda Triangle players chose Bermuda Triangle for a particular reason. But before I go, I would also like to point out something that I completely disagree with W Slash's video. And that's the part where he talks about um it's the part where he talks about